Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Digital Fundraising and Crowdfunding during COVID-19 and beyond. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Claire Walway, Church Client Relationship Manager, and I'd like to welcome you to this, our second fundraising webinar. We understand that now more than ever, there is an immediate need for funding to help you meet the day-to-day needs of your church and community. With this in mind, we have developed a wide range of resources to help churches with their fundraising activities during this challenging time. These can be found on our new online fundraising hub at www.ecclesiastical.com/church fundraising. Whatever level of fundraising experience or knowledge, we hope you find today's webinar useful and insightful, and it'll help you begin or build on your digital fundraising. This webinar is presented in collaboration with fundraising specialists Philanthropy Company. For the last 18 years, they have worked with a range of organisations and charities, particularly in the faith, church and heritage sectors. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce today's speaker, Andrew Evans. Andrew is one of Philanthropy Company's senior consultants and leading digital fundraising expert. Andrew has worked with many churches of many denominations and sizes, including leading a church through a major rebuilding project, and has been involved in the setting up of 5 new church congregations. Before I hand over to Andrew, there are, however, a few housekeeping items I need to cover. All the advice in the webinar is applicable at the time of recording. As I'm sure you'll understand, due to the unusual circumstances, we can't guarantee that all statements made will remain correct. We have tried our best to make sure the content will stay relevant for you and your church, now and into the future as communities come back together. At the end of the session, there will be an opportunity to ask Andrew any questions you may have. I really would encourage you to use this opportunity to ask a fundraising expert. And if you miss anything, please don't worry. We'll be uploading the on-demand recording to our fundraising hub so you can watch back at any time. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Andrew Evans, Philanthropy Company.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you everybody joining us for taking the time to join the seminar today. I hope it's going to be really helpful to you in your fundraising journey. My name is Andrew Evans. I'm one of the consultants at Philanthropy Company, and I advise a range of clients, including churches and cathedrals, on a whole variety of fundraising issues. But I've also seen it from the other side. I've been a church planter, I've been a church pastor for 10 years, I'm a church leader, and I'm an active member of my local parish church, St Michael and All Angels here in Chester, where I'm talking to you from. We're here today to talk about digital fundraising. So I thought it would be good to start by thinking, what exactly do we mean by that? We live, I guess, in a digital world, don't we? Where even cash in a collection plate gets turned into binary code in a church bank account somewhere one day. So I guess in a sense, there's no sort of fundraising left in the world that isn't digital, at least at some level. But for the purposes of this webinar, what we mean by digital fundraising isn't just any fundraising that has some sort of digital technology or some sort of new tech element. So, things like contactless giving boxes in your church building, which enable congregants and visitors to use their contactless card or their phone. It's got some digital bits, but that's not really what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is fundraising, where all, or at least almost all, of the entire process from contacting the person who's going to give you to actually receiving the money in the bank account happens online. So digital fundraising might include a link in your online Sunday service videos that takes you to a website where you can make a donation. It might include a Facebook advertisement for a crowdfunding campaign. And when you click on that advertisement, it takes people to a campaign that your church is running to fund a food bank or a community project. The internet is everywhere and nowhere. But most digital fundraising is actually surprisingly local. And most of the people that you engage with digital fundraising, however you do it, are going to be people who are already connected to your church or people who live in your neighbourhood. Not all of them, but most of them. But the tools available to you through the internet are going to enable you to connect with lots of people in your communities that you wouldn't be able to reach any other way. The opportunities of digital fundraising for local churches are really real and really exciting. But I appreciate that for lots of people, the whole idea just sounds a little bit scary, and some of the words that are used to describe some of the things that happen probably sound just like a foreign language to you. So I hope that you're here today to find out what you need in order to be able to do digital fundraising and to get some tips that you can take your first steps in that journey. So let's think then a little bit about how you get ready for digital fundraising. How do you get ready? Well, one of the main worries that people have about digital fundraising is that you're going to need to be some sort of computing genius in order to do it. You're going to need racks and racks of servers. You're going to be able to type coding at 100 words a second or something. Well, I want you to rest assured that it is absolutely not the case that you need to be some sort of tech expert. There is nothing I'm going to suggest in today's webinar that you cannot do with a fairly reliable internet connection, not even like a super fast one, just a reasonably decent one, and a computer. It does really help if you've got a desktop or a laptop computer for some of the things, mostly just because it makes typing much quicker and easier. But almost all of the stuff you can do just as well from a smartphone or a tablet if you're prepared to take a little bit more time typing data in. You do not need to be highly skilled. If you are used to doing things like internet shopping, or maybe you bank online, or you use Zoom or Skype to communicate with your family and friends, then if you can do those things, you will be absolutely fine. You can definitely do this. To be honest, if you can use the internet well enough to watch this webinar, then you can do digital fundraising. So you don't need to be a tech genius. You don't need to have loads and loads of expensive equipment. What you do need to do is be willing to put time into digital fundraising. Because digital fundraising, like every other sort of fundraising, is all about building relationships with people. When I was about 9, we did a sponsored silence at school, raising money for a local charity in Chester, where I live. No doubt the teachers thought it was the best day they'd ever had at school. To raise the money, I took my sponsor sheet round to all the neighbours on my street, to all of my dad's work colleagues at the university. I rang up my grandmas, I rang up my aunties and uncles. Basically what I did in that sponsored silence was an analogue crowdfunder. I got lots of people to give small amounts of money that added up to a biggish amount of money that we then gave on to the charity. Now, I worked really hard at it. I think I got about 30 sponsors, which is one of the best in the class. Still very proud of that, 30 years later. Whereas today, I could use my Facebook and my LinkedIn and my Twitter and my Instagram accounts to communicate with a now much larger number of people that I know. Maybe I could get to 3,000 or 4,000 people that I know just using my own accounts. But you know what? The reason that some of those people might click through and go, yeah, I'll sponsor Andrew to shut up for an hour, would be actually just the same as the reason that people did back in the day. They'll give money either because they care about me and they kind of just want to demonstrate their support for what I'm involved with because I'm their friend and I'm important to them, or because they care about the cause and they want to support the charity, the work that's being done. Either way, it's a relationship thing, isn't it? So successful digital fundraising is going to build on the relationships that you've got. Either it's going to be the people who care about the people in your church who are doing the asking, and they're going to give, or it will be people who care about the work that your church does, and they want to support it. And growing the number of people who fall into either of those two categories, and growing their enthusiasm and their passion for what you do, just takes time. So if you think about your regular congregation, it's just about carefully explaining week by week, what are the needs of the church? What are we doing with the money? What difference are we making? If it's your whole town or your whole village that you're trying to engage in something more like a crowdfunder, it's helping them over time to see what a great service your church provides to the community, what a real difference you make to what it's like to live in that place, how much help you give to young families or to older people or whoever it is that you particularly work with. And in order to do that, you're going to have to be there. You're going to have to write short articles and little posts that you can put up on your social media. You're going to have to compose tweets. You're going to have to take photos of the events that you have. You do not need to be a geek genius, but you do need to be prepared to put plenty of time to creating great and interesting content and to spreading the word about what you're doing. Now, there are hundreds of ways in which you can raise funds digitally, and literally thousands of platforms that enable you to do that. But for most churches, I think the digital fundraising you're likely to do falls into three categories, and we're going to think about those in the rest of our time together. So just three categories we're going to think about. First one is online giving for your congregation. Over the last few months, churches have ushered in a digital revolution in our worship services that I think most of us would have thought completely impossible if you'd asked last year. If you'd asked me in January, what stuff will my church be doing digitally? I would never have imagined that it is the stuff we are now doing digitally. In my own church, we created Sunday services featuring different people preaching and giving readings and leading prayers each week, all recorded in their homes on their phones, and then distributed to the whole church family. This is interspersed in a really well thought out, well ordered service with hymns and contemporary songs from YouTube. So we've got cathedral choirs, and we've got All Souls Orchestra, and we've got Hillsongs playing in our church. We've managed Skype-based small groups, and we've managed breakout rooms for the whole church so that the whole church can gather together and then split into little breakout rooms in order to chat over a coffee after we've all engaged in the digital service together. Our youth work's gone entirely online, and we've also had up to 200 people, so not just the core church, but all sorts of other people joining in from our local area with a church quiz night on Zoom. And we are not alone. Most churches, even those with quite small congregations, have managed to deliver a lot of their work digitally, sometimes in really interesting and innovative ways. And I've gone and watched loads of those services, because I'm quite interested in this kind of thing. And what I've discovered is that the one thing that has not been translated into people's digital services is the collection or the offering that was a normal part of most people's Sundays. Now, of course, these days, most of our core givers in most churches give by standing order or direct debit or some other regular way that doesn't require them to be physically present anyway. But there are still a substantial proportion of people who have probably stopped giving because the way in which they used to give, which was putting a check or cash in a collection plate, is just not available to them anymore. And your digital services may well have picked up a whole bunch of people who don't normally attend church and would be prepared to give, but they've just never been asked. I was chatting to one friend the other day who's a vicar down in Kent. I think he gets about 300 or 400 typically on a Sunday before the COVID lockdown. Their digital services, they've been looking at about 1,500 people attending. That is a lot of people who might well be prepared to support the church's work, but they've just never been asked to give. So it's really important to have one or more ways that people can give easily online. And it's really important to have regular pointers in all your services and all your other communications to take people to that platform. So if you're not already set up with a way that people can give online, that's the place to start. That's my first thing that I do if you've not done anything around digital giving. And there's loads of platforms that you could use to do that. I'm not particularly in the business of recommending any one of them. But on the slide that's coming up, there are just 4, and they're there because they represent slightly different kinds of approaches to dealing with this problem, 4 that you should check out. The first one there at the top of the slide, you'll almost certainly have heard of. It's Just Giving. It's been made particularly in the news recently by Captain Tom Moore's charity walk to raise money for the NHS around his garden. It is by far the biggest online platform for charity donations. It is super easy to use. It is really well known. It's a little bit more expensive than others, but one of my tips is always think about how much money you're going to get in more than about how much money it's going to cost you, because if it's going to raise more, then it's worth spending a little bit more on it. So Just Giving is a really great one. If you'd like a slightly different approach, give.net, which is run by Christian Charity Stewardship, the fees are significantly lower. It's slightly less user-friendly, I would say. It doesn't have quite the same level of name recognition, but lots of people who are sort of been around the kind of Christian world will recognize Stewardship and give.net, and they offer a really great service if you'd like to use them. I've also mentioned here, third on the list, the parish giving scheme. That's a little bit cheeky. It's not entirely digital because you do need a paper form or a phone call in order to sign up for it. But they do process the gift aid for you as a church. People who are giving through it can sign up to have their giving up rated by inflation every year. So that really helps. One of the problems with standing orders, they tend to become static. And the other great thing about that, from the point of view, if you're a Church of England church in a diocese that's adopted this, not all of them have, but most have, is that the cost of running the platform is met by the diocese, so you get 100% of all the money that comes through it, which is obviously an attractive proposition. The fourth one on the list there, again, is a different type of approach. Church Suite is one of a number of different church management platforms. There's a pile of these. So it's not just about giving. They look after things like your rotas, your safeguarding, your events, your room bookings, all sorts of different things. But Church Suite and a number of others have an online giving module that adds the ability to collect donations and process gift aid. So if you're thinking about sort of digital stuff more generally in your church and looking at trying to improve the way you do things and having a slightly more modern approach to things like rotas, it might be worth looking at one of those rather than just a standalone giving thing and sort of bringing it all together in a single platform. Worth a look. A number of others are available, listed some there: Virgin Money Giving, Givey.com, CAF Online, Total Giving. Again, if you just do a search on the internet for something like digital giving platforms for churches, they'll come up with loads and you can compare them. And I would definitely recommend that you go and look at some in detail, maybe do yourself a little table of the costs and the pros and cons of each one. There's also a really helpful section to help you with this in the Church of England's Parish Resources website. So go to the Parish Resources website and look for receiving online donations. There's lots of tips to help you sign up with the processes for signing up for those things. They're really easy, but it just talks you through it. And if you'd like more help, that's the place to go. Now, of course, the difficult part is not signing up for a platform. That's the easy bit. The difficult part is getting people to give for it. So here's my top 5 tips for promoting online giving to your congregation. Number 1, make giving part of the digital liturgy. So if you've got an online service, have a regular form of words, or several regular forms of words, to remind people to give, just like you have all of the other liturgical elements, no doubt, of your service. You know, form of words for confessions and for prayers and for introduction and for closing, all of those things. Why not have a little section that just reminds people to give? Ideally, do that right at the beginning, perhaps before the main part of the service starts, so that people can kind of go off and make their gift and come back again, or right at the end. So it's the first thing they do once they finish kind of chatting with people. There's something they can click and it'll tell them to make the donation. Second top tip would be to make sure that whatever platform you choose to use for this is really visible and prominent on your church website, if you've got one, or on your entry on something like a churchnearyou.com if you use that platform. Third top tip would be to be really clear with people about the impact of coronavirus on the finances of the church. So maybe your treasurer should do a slot in one of your digital services where it just talks through what the impacts have been. How much money have you lost from hall hire, for example? That's a big issue, I know, for lots of people. Or you could put the information out in an email or some sort of a newsletter. Just let people know what the situation is. People do genuinely respond to the things that they know are needed. Ask if people will help make up some of that money by making a donation through whatever the online platform is. Telling stories about the difference that people's giving makes really helps as well. You know, it's very easy to say, well, our giving went up last year by £10,000, so that's great. But unless you actually say to people what you did with that money, what difference it made, they're not likely to be motivated to give again. So instead say something like, last year our giving went up by £10,000. That meant we were able to employ a part-time youth worker, and we've engaged with 200 different young people in primary schools because of that. Something that actually shows the difference that you make to real people's lives, absolutely key. And finally, my 5th top tip is reduce people's anxiety. There'll be quite a lot of people in your church, I'm sure, who would be very happy to give online, but just are a little bit nervous about something. Maybe they're a bit worried about the security. Maybe they're a bit worried that they'll get halfway through the process and then mess it up. Why not just give them a phone number? Find someone in your church who's willing to talk people through the process of doing it. Give out their phone number with the thing, and then if someone gets stuck, they can just phone up a friendly person in the church who's going to help talk them through it. That's a really great way just to overcome those barriers. Okay, so that's a bit of stuff for online and giving for your congregation. Second section we're going to talk about is crowdfunding. What do I mean by that? Well, crowdfunding started out as a business term. It was the idea that rather than having one massive investor, a venture capitalist or some sort of angel investor, businesses could harness the power of the internet to get lots and lots of people to give them small investments to help them get off the ground. If you think about it like that, churches have pretty much always been crowdfunded. Lots of people giving small donations on the whole to ensure that the work carries on. Most of the platforms you can use for crowdfunding, they're just the same as the ones you might use for congregational giving. We'll talk a bit more about them in a minute. But if you want to engage people outside of your normal congregation to help you fund a really interesting piece of work that you're doing, you need to raise money for something that they're going to connect with and they're going to want to support. Crowdfunding works best when there's a very specific, very tangible project that's going to be really widely popular in your local community and that you've already got some money for. So the next slide gives you some examples of a bad crowdfunder and a good crowdfunder. So a bad crowdfunder says, we want a new curate, which is really only of interest to people who've already come to your church, to be honest. And most of those might not even know what a curate is or does. It's going to cost £30,000 a year for the next 4 years, so it's going to cost a lot of money over a long period of time, and we haven't got any of the money yet. So you're asking the crowd, if you were, to do all the funding, and people are just going to think, you know, I just don't think we're going to raise that much money. It's not going to happen, and that's a really powerful disincentive to give. Compare that with a good crowdfunder. A good crowdfunder says something like, we're redecorating and buying new furniture for our church hall to provide better facilities for everyone. That's something that's going to be of interest to many people in your town. All sorts of people have probably been in your church hall, whether it's for an activity, an event, a birthday party, whatever it might be, and probably even quite a lot who haven't, but who know how important community facilities are. It will cost £18,000. That's a sizable amount of money, but it's a kind of attainable amount of money. Not the sort of amount of money most people would think is ridiculous. And it's quite specific, and you need it now. And then you say, and we've already been given £10,000. Maybe that's some people in the church who've given significant donations, or you've had a grant from a trust towards this. You've done most of the work already, and that means people looking at that crowdfunder are going to think, you know what, I'm pretty confident that this is going to happen, and so it is worth me putting in my 10 or £20. So that's the first thing to do. Decide the project, clarify the costs, and raise or allocate some money to it. Next thing you need to do then is to choose a platform. As I said, you can use some of the things like Just Giving, but there are also very specialist crowdfunder platforms that are really worth thinking about. The two biggest that are definitely worth a look are GoFundMe and Crowdfunder. But again, just do an internet search on crowdfunding for churches. There'll be loads of options. Have a look at them, compare them, you know, do yourself a little table, whatever you need to do. Once you've chosen a platform and you've got a project, you need to choose a launch date and have a plan to spread the word as widely and as quickly, and I'm really going to emphasize that, as quickly as possible. So crowdfunders work best when you have a big splash. Okay, so what you really want to do, to use an analogy, you want to drop one massive boulder into the pond rather than slowly dropping lots of pebbles into the pond. So pick a day when you're going to launch it, and on that day, make sure you've already done a press release, so it's in the local press, maybe even have some sort of event if you can. Use your parish newsletter that maybe goes out on the same day. Get on Facebook, put lots of posts up, email all the people in the church and everybody else that you know. Get people to use their networks and make a big splash. And then work really hard at plugging that crowdfunder, have it everywhere, so people, you know, so you'll feel like you're bored with it. Other people won't be, they won't see it as much as you, but like, really go for it for a fixed period of time. I'd recommend no more than about 2 weeks. That's the way to make it successful. If it drags on and on and on, it won't raise any more money and it will just become a millstone around your neck. Quick aside, it's also possible to use events as a sort of crowdfunder. So, you know, in the past, you might have, when we were allowed in our buildings, you'd had a music concert to raise money for something. You charge £5 a head to come in. People would have paid their £5. They might have bought a glass of wine afterwards, whatever it is. You can basically replicate that kind of thing now digitally. So you could have a digital music event. You know, maybe you can't fill the church with people because of the restrictions, but maybe you could get a really lovely string quartet to come and kind of, you know, play something and record it and broadcast it out, and have some sort of compere or host who chats over it. You can either sell tickets for that using a platform like Eventbrite, or you can make it free to come to, and then people can make donations just literally on screen during the course of the evening. If you'd like to do that, there's a really great website called Tap Simple. Basically, you can create an event that people can come to, and then just during the evening, they can click on boxes and they can make donations. Really great way to raise money using events in the coronavirus era. Okay, thirdly and finally, we're coming to the end of our time now. Let's talk a little bit about social media. You can raise money directly using social media. So if you've got a Facebook page for your church or a Twitter account, that will have, if you're a charity, and you may need to go through a registration sort of little process, but they will offer you as a charity the opportunity to include a donate button on your page and in your posts. So people can just see the things that you're doing and just click donate, and there's a process for that. But mostly social media is best used as a way to spread the message about all your other digital fundraising. So if you've got a really great crowdfunder going on, or you've just set up a new mechanism for your congregation to give online, you can use your social media platform to let people know that that is available and to encourage them to participate in it. But there's a problem. And the problem is that all social media platforms are designed to stop organizations sharing what they're doing. And the reason for that is they want organizations to advertise what they're doing and pay them, Facebook or Twitter, in order to share it, because that's how they make their money. So how can you get around that problem? Well, the answer is, in order to reach lots of people with something your church is doing, you need to post it on your church Facebook or Twitter page, and then get all the individuals, all the what you might call real people in your church, to tell people about it, to share that, to repost it, to retweet it. That's how you're going to do it, and that's why the network is so important. So one of the most successful events like this live, but it wasn't a fundraising event, it was getting people to come to an event, was a carol service. And we basically did like a kind of Facebook bomb, effectively. So we got 50 people in the church who we knew all had Facebook pages, and we asked them all at a particular time on a particular day to share a post that we were making about the event we were having. And everybody did it between sort of 9 and 10 a.m. on whatever this Friday was. And that created enough of a kind of wave of that post going out that thousands and thousands and thousands of people all saw that post at the same time, and people started talking about it, and it became a bit of a thing, and actually the event was really successful. And it works because of the network effect of social media. So how are you going to do this? Well, my top tips. Top tip number one is to just pick one or two platforms. It's quite easy to sort of think that the way to sort of do this social media thing is to have everything, is to have Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and all the different things. It's too hard to maintain. It requires a lot of effort and energy. So just pick one or two platforms and use them well. And I would generally say, if you're only going to do one, Facebook is the place to be, because almost everybody is on it. And particularly the people of the kind of age and stage in life who tend to be most likely to come to church are also almost always on Facebook. So it's the best way to engage your most likely audience. Second top tip is to think about who your audience is and create and share interesting content for them regularly. So quite a lot of churches that I see that are doing things on social media, their posts just look like they're aimed at the people who already come to their church. But that's a little bit unnecessary, because the people who already come to your church every week pretty much already know what you're doing. So you need to think about who are the people who might well come to our church and be engaged and be interested, but they're not here yet. And create and share interesting content for them. What would they like to hear about? What would make them be more intrigued? What would make them want to get more involved? Third top tip is always include some sort of call to action. Sometimes that might be a please give to support this project, so it's actually a financial call to action. But often it won't be. It'll just be something that you want people to do in response. Please like our Facebook page. Please sign up to come to this digital event. Please share this with other people that you know. And that's really important because it helps people to feel involved. It helps them to feel engaged in what you're doing. And final tip, keep at it. Rome was not built in a day. Building an audience, whether that's an audience of people who physically come to your church, an audience of people who give to things, or an audience of people who read the things that you post on social media, just takes time and effort. So keep going. Don't be discouraged if it's a bit slow progress. Sometimes it is. Keep at it. Keep creating great content. Keep doing things. Keep asking people to support, and you will get there. There's loads more great tips from social media in the All Churches Advice and Resources section, allchurches.co.uk, and if you search through advice and resources, loads of great stuff there that you can browse through to help you do this more and better. Well, I hope I've provoked a whole bunch of interesting thoughts and some questions, maybe some things you'd like to know more about, some things you'd like clarification on. So let's go to a bit of a time of questions and answers.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing your insights and for the overview of digital fundraising. I'm Catherine Keeper, Fundraising Coordinator at Ecclesiastical, and I'm delighted now to have the opportunity to pass some of your questions on to Andrew to answer live. So thank you to those of you who have submitted questions during the webinar and indeed previously. We really appreciate them. So firstly, Andrew, I've got a really interesting question here from All Saints Church in East Budley. And they want to know, how can we grow a digital giving culture in church?
Hi, Catherine, and thank you to All Saints for that. It's a really brilliant question. I'm going to give you a slightly provocative answer by saying don't. So don't grow a digital giving culture. I would say grow a giving culture and then allow people to find the way that they want to give within that culture. So, you know, if people are not already giving as generously as you'd really like them to, then just give them some digital options and give them some analog options for giving and see what people take up, and don't be too worried about the mechanism that they use. And I think most of the things that will help you grow that culture will help you grow it for both new mechanisms of giving and old mechanisms of giving. So tell great stories about what the money does. Share your budget, not just in terms of boring headings like salary and heating, but in terms of interesting headings like mission and pastoral care and Sunday services. So grow a giving culture and do all the things you can to engage people with what you're about and allow people to find their own mechanisms of doing that, would be my advice, and give them a good choice, including some of the things we've talked about in the webinar.
Thank you, very interesting there. Our next question is from St Richard's Church in Oldwick, and they've asked, how can we reach people who actually don't have an online presence or who aren't that confident digitally?
That's another really good question, isn't it? I think if those are people who are not part of your church family, and you're just thinking about other people in the community, then again, my answer would be, don't try too hard, just reach them in the way that you can reach them. So if what works for you as a church is still, the days when we're allowed to again, hopefully next summer, having a church fete and physically getting people along and raising money that way, then do that. Don't use digital just for the sake of it. I think if you're talking about people in your church family who don't have an online presence and are not digitally engaged yet, take some baby steps as a church to help them access things that will be useful to them more widely, and then the giving will come later. So a great example from my own church, we have introduced a sort of church management software that does all the rotas for things like coffee and kids work electronically. And we've gently pushed people into using that digitally, even if their previous preference was for paper. There's still a paper option, but we've kind of herded people towards that. And what we then find is that the same people, once they've got that system, then use the other bits of it. They put the church weekend away online, they start giving online, and they gradually develop those kind of skills. So I think that's where I'd start. If it's people in your church, find something like a piece of church management software, gently introduce people to it, and the giving bit will follow after that.
Great, thank you, Andrew. We've got a more specific question next from St George's Church in Newbury. So thank you for your question. Who asked, how can we use QR codes in digital fundraising?
Okay, thanks, St George's. So QR codes, if you don't know what they are for others listening, a QR is a quick response code. You'll probably have seen them. It looks a bit like a barcode, but instead of just having one lot of straight lines, it's got sort of black and white blobs. What a QR code does is it basically encodes a website address. So there's something that reads a QR code, will read it, and it will take you to a website. And they're dead easy to make. There's loads of generators for them online. You just Google QR code generator. And what I would do with them is I would use them at like whatever points you think are helpful. So if you've got a church, for example, that is open during the week to visitors but unmanned, you could have them kind of placed at a couple of points on kind of visible spaces, walls, or next to a collection box. Anybody with either an Apple phone or an Android phone, so almost all the smartphones now, you can take out your phone. As soon as you switch the camera on, it will read the QR code and it will take you to the website that it takes you to. And for your church, I'd suggest that should be the website of your giving page, which we've just talked about in the webinar. So if you've gone with Just Giving, you can put your church's Just Giving page encoded in the QR code, and then you can use that. So it's a really great way to just connect people without them having to type stuff. So you can put it on sort of walls and by collection boxes. You can print them in notice sheets, and that's a really good way to use them. You could put them on your church's kind of annual report. So anywhere where you think somebody might see this and want to make a response of making a donation, and I want to save them the trouble of having to type in the website address, which might be the thing that puts them off, this just shortcuts that step and makes it easier. So they're just a really great way to make something simpler for people.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And another question linked to that and linked to making it easy for people to give online. We have a great question from St Mark's in Cardiff, who have asked for some advice on adding a giving button link to their website.
Okay. So again, same principle applies. So the thing it links to should be wherever the giving option is for you. So that might be Just Giving, or it might be some other giving platform. And hopefully, if you've heard the webinar, your next steps are going to be to go and set that up. So once you've done that, that should be where it links to. Then you need to think about where are we going to put this button, and I'd suggest that you put it right on the home page, somewhere very visible and easy to find. So that would be the sort of location thing. And then you actually need to get it on the website. If you do your own website as a church, you've probably got someone vaguely techie who's doing that for you, and they're probably using something like WordPress or something like Wix, so a site that's designed to help you build websites. They all have sort of a selection of buttons that you can kind of drop into the web page, and they make it really easy for you to do that. And then all you have to do is say, this button needs to direct people to this other website. So if you've got something like that, you can do it that way. If you've got someone external doing your website, lots of churches, they have a web designer they've contracted to build their website. Just ring them up and tell them you want a donate button, and they'll just ask you for to send them the link where you want it to go, point to where you want it to click through to, and they'll add it for you. But if you're only going to do one thing with your website for online donations, that would be the thing that I do. Just have a prominent button that takes you to the place from the homepage where people can easily make a donation. So either DIY method, if that's how you do your website, there will be buttons available on those, or get your web person to do that for you.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Next, I've got a really interesting question from Newlands Church, who ask, we're a very small church in a rural area with frequent visitors, but we have no mobile phone signal or internet connection. What possibilities does digital fundraising offer to us?
Okay, that's a great question. Well, I hope, having heard the webinar, that you'll feel that lots of the things that we've talked about, like having stuff for your congregation to give online, running a crowdfunding appeal, actually all of those can be done without having to have mobile signal in your church, because people will do them from the comfort of their own home, so they should all be fine. There are other things that you can do though. So if you'd like to have a contactless donation box actually in the church building for people to give to, the great news is that lots of them work offline. So people can come in, they can bring their card, they can tap it against the reader, it will take their donation off the card, it will just sit in the box until somebody plugs the box into an internet connection. So it will work, and it just means that once a week or whatever, someone will have to take the box home and plug it into Wi-Fi, and then it will upload all the donations, and they'll all come to the bank account. So there's loads of companies that do these contactless donation boxes. I've worked with the guys at Goodbox, so two words, Goodbox. I know that their boxes do that. I imagine that quite a lot of others do as well. So you can still do that. And then I guess my sort of final thing would be, maybe there's just something to think about here about actually, if what we've got is we're in a place where there's no mobile phone signal and it's not very easy for people to get connected to the internet, why don't you, as part of your service to the community, install Wi-Fi in your church, perhaps with a repeater that reaches outside, so that actually you can then become a place where people can come and access the internet. which both gives you the opportunity to do all those internet digital things that you'd like to do, and probably draws more people to come into the church, even if it's for a look around. So they might just be surprised on Facebook and sort of sit in a pew and do that for 10 minutes. But then actually that might be a really great way of just engaging a whole bunch of perhaps especially younger visitors who wouldn't walk in the door otherwise. And you can tell them something about the history of the church or the ministries that you do, or whatever it might be while they're there. So maybe there's an opportunity there just to get an internet line put in for you and to offer people Wi-Fi. And that will be both a great service to the community and also help with that fundraising piece as well.
Thanks, Andrew. It's a really interesting take on that. And you mentioned in your answer contactless giving, which is interesting because we've had a lot of questions through about contactless and text giving. So I wonder, could we get your insights on contactless and text giving and how they fit with the church's digital fundraising?
Yes, definitely. So they're a kind of hybrid method in the sense that they have a digital element, but people need generally to be somewhere connected to the contactless. Text giving has been around for a long time, pretty much ever since text messaging was invented. It's really fallen off in recent years. There was a very big service provided by Just Giving and Vodafone called Text Giving, which they actually stopped doing about 3 or 4 years ago because there just wasn't enough uptake. There are other services, so I think there's one called Donate. If you wanted to search for Donate Text Giving, that still exists. Completely free to set up. Basically, people just have to text your code. You'll get like a number code for your charity and the amount of money they want to give, and that will happen. And it's basically free. They charge you a percentage of what gets given, but there's no cost to you for setting it up. So if that's something that you think would work for you, it's certainly worth having in your armory of different things. The only place I find it works really well is at a live in-person event or at an online event where you say, if you'd like to make a donation, get your phone out now and text this to this number. And then people do it there and then. I've not found it working very well sort of more generally than that, but if you do sort of events, then it's certainly worth looking at text giving. Much more worthwhile and more worth investing in almost certainly as a church contactless giving. So basically the best versions of that work by will be a box somewhere appropriate in the church, maybe at the sort of back near maybe where you have a sort of cash collection box or a plate or whatever. It'll have a screen, often a touch screen, and people will be able to select an amount they want to give, usually multiples of £5 or £10 up to about £50. They'll tap their card and then that will then just work. They're really great for churches where it's open in the week, but it's not attended and people kind of come in and wander around. And just maybe if you've got historical architecture, often people will give. It's much more secure than having a collection box for cash because there's not really anything to steal. There's no point in someone stealing your donation, your contactless giving box because it's not worth anything. So they're really good for that. They're also really great just on Sundays for people who like to give on the day, or for visitors to your church for a Sunday service who don't have cash with them. So it's really worth doing for that. And also often if you have a box like that, you can have a more traditional card payment box, and that's great for if you've got a bookstore or if you take payment for church weekends away or whatever, doing that through cards rather than the sort of just cash and checks. I guess churches tend to be routed to. So definitely worth thinking about a contactless donation box for most churches. In terms of cost, they basically cost almost the same as taking payment with any other kind of credit or debit card. So there'll be either a 25p type fee or a percentage fee, and then you have to pay a small amount of money to get the box in the first place. As I say, Good Box, I work with those guys. I know that they're great. For other people who do, loads of other businesses who do contactless donation boxes, including some of the big banks. So if you bank with one of the big high street banks, they may well be able to set that service up for you as well.
Great, thank you, Andrew. I hope that was helpful. I think we have time for one final question about digital events. So we have a question here saying, you mentioned digital concerts. Are there any other kind of digital events you know of, and how can you raise money from these digital events?
Yeah, so I've come across all sorts of really brilliant things. So I know one church where they had a partnership with another church in Tanzania. They basically did a digital live meal with the people in Tanzania. So they basically sent out a recipe, and all the Tanzanian people cooked some sort of British food, and all the British people cooked some Tanzanian food, and then they all sat down over all ate it together, and they basically just sold tickets and said, you know, if you'd like to come to this, £5 or whatever amount of money it was. So that was a really great digital event. The other really good digital event I saw recently, someone did an auction, a sort of digital auction of promises. So people in the church offered various services. You may well see these done sort of physically live. They work really well digitally. So they got someone in the church who's a kind of great storyteller, raconteur, to act as the sort of auctioneer. And people submitted offers to do someone's garden or take them for a ride in their vintage Aston Martin, or all the different things that offers that people had, and then they auctioned them off, and that made a lot of money. And again, depending on the platform you use, there are ones that could include buttons to do the kind of bidding for the auction, or you can just say the amount out loud, or you can write it in the text chat. So there's almost anything actually I think you could do as a physical event, you probably can do as a digital event. It's just a question of your imagination, and obviously some things are harder to do than others. So the concert one, I think, and I have seen it done well, it's more challenging because just getting the quality of sound and the recording and everything is quite hard. But all, like, whatever you were thinking of doing physically, it's worth asking yourself, could we do this as a digital event? And could we somehow can you do a digital church fair or a digital afternoon tea or whatever, and people either pay to come in or make donations once they arrive.
Great, thank you, Andrew, and thank you so much for your responses. I'm afraid that's all the questions we have time for in today's session. I hope that you found Andrew's insights helpful and you picked up some good tips for digital fundraising. Thank you everyone for submitting your questions and for listening. I'd like to pass back over now to Claire Walway, our Church Client Relationship Manager, to close the session.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing your insights to help churches with digital fundraising during this time. And thanks to you all for listening and asking your questions. We really do hope you found the session helpful and it's increased your confidence to fundraise online. This recording will be uploaded to the Hub when available for you to watch back at any time. But please don't forget there are other helpful resources on our fundraising hub, www.ecclesiastical.com/church fundraising. We've also set up a dedicated fundraising helpline for you to get guidance and further support from one of our church insurance consultants. Please do get in touch if you have any fundraising questions. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for listening, wishing you every success with your fundraising efforts.